All right, we are live with Joel and Michelle Levey. We are super excited to have you guys on the show. We're going to talk about your book that's releasing today, Manual for the Awakening Warrior, the Special Forces Secret Mind, Body, Spirit Training Program. But I mean, we've got also a bunch of other stuff to talk about, of course. You guys have been at the forefront of mindfulness for decades. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. We really appreciate being here with you.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Mindfulness was a big part of my life since Vancouver. Like we talked about me living in Vancouver. I got sober there in 2008. And mindfulness was like a key part of that. I mean, I remember specific instances lying on the couch and doing these mindfulness practices and like having that sort of like that click of like, oh, I'm not my thoughts. Like I can watch my thoughts. So pretty important practice for me back then. It's kind of changed. Obviously, everything evolves. I don't really practice it in the same way, but I mean, you guys were such a huge part of the whole mindfulness thing. I mean, when I looked at your client list, I'm like, you guys have taught all kinds of corporations and governments and special organizations. Like, what's it been like the last couple of decades watching this whole field develop?
It's really been exploding, and it's been the mindfulness training was an integral part, a really central part of the work we did with the special forces.
Like literally special forces.
Yes.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
You're not just saying like special forces, but
no, we basically, I think most people are familiar with SEAL Team 6. We basically had 2 SEAL Team 6 teams, but they were U.S. Army Green Berets instead of SEAL teams for 6 months full time, pulling no other duty but hanging out with Joel and Michelle and our team. And part of that was a month-long silent mindfulness style encampment rather than meditation retreat. But for perspective, I remember what we were we were talking about Vancouver. We were at the Earth Dance on the beach in Kitsilano some years ago, and the young friend who we've known for years through the festival scene came up to us and said, "How old were you when you got activated?" And I laughed and I said, I was about 16. I was 16. And so to keep in mind, in the early days, mindfulness wasn't on the radar. And I remember, back in the early 70s in Seattle, there were 2 yoga teachers in Seattle. A friend had just started the first espresso stand pre-Starbucks. And there were 3 meditation centers in town. And I knew one other person who knew about mindfulness. Okay. So, like radical expansion of the field. I was working, doing research in the Consciousness Research Laboratory in the Psych Department at University of Washington in the early 70s. And it was a colorful time to be studying consciousness, needless to say.
Well, what do you attribute the growth to?
I think a great deal, 2 things, one is a great deal of suffering and anxiety and bewilderment and confusion and overwhelm and stress, and people looking for remedies to that, and enough people, really interested in peak performance and extraordinary human potential and who had got glimpses, either, through spontaneous mystical experiences that arose while they were walking down the beach or making love or after a fairly sizable dose of the botanicals growing on the University of Washington campus or whatever it may be. That kind of whet the appetite for people to say, I want more of this vibrancy and this sacred presence and this capability and this ease. And I want less of this tension and stress and confusion and bewilderment that comes by wrapping my own mind around the axle and not realizing how vast the space of presence is in which all these experiences are arising and passing. So I think it's, if you look at the word Buddha, which is a technical term, it basically means an awakened being, a fully awakened being. The first syllable means having, totally resolved all of the delusions and confusions and stresses and frustrations and come to peace. And the Da is having fully awakened to the magnificence of the indwelling noble qualities that came bundled in a human package. And somebody who's managed to do that is a enlightened being, a Buddha, you know, whatever you want to call them, you know. So it's that dual yearning, I think, that has led to the revolutions of these times, plus a lot of creative research that's validated these methods. When I was in the consciousness research lab, we had a bookshelf about as big as the wall behind you, Graham.
Yeah.
You know, like in the screen, with every book in print at that time.
In English.
In English. Every translation of books on yoga, meditation, metaphysics, psychic phenomena, peak performance. And there wasn't that much. You could read it all in those days. You know, look at how things have you know, vastly expanded now. And another motivator for the expanse of this is people realize that they could colonize it and commodify it and make money on it. Be it mindfulness or other varieties of, you know, human potential movements. So that also, I think, radically led to the expansion of the field that we're playing
it
on.
got
But
well marketed.
we were there. We were there really when the wave hit the shore.
It also became a tool that people could use to make money in other ways. I mean, not just by selling mindfulness. It seems like, because I mean, the 70s, that's got to be kind of when, like, is it 70s or 80s when the like Dale Carnegie stuff first starts coming out and people start actually really paying attention to being able to use these sort of things that might have been reserved to like hippies and stuff like that for real, you know, I mean, real internal growth and being able to use that, because that does seem to be a thing that all these sort of successful people sort of have in common, is they're not just, you know, they've got sort of some sort of natural level of mindfulness that they seem to be practicing at some point. You mentioned all those green berets. I'd be wondering, like, even on the way in, those are pretty special humans, you know, they're the kind of warriors at an elite level, which I would imagine just requires a sort of mindfulness already to a certain extent. So I'm wondering what those kind of guys have in common coming in, that because they're already above and beyond the regular population, I would say. Like, in order just to get to that level of mastery, you need to have sort of some mindfulness already, I would think.
Yeah, and just as a survival tool as well. But they had a lot of discipline, and in order to really deepen in a mindfulness practice, to develop that, you need to practice. You need to stay with it. So these guys knew how to show up. They knew how to show up for training, and they had a commitment to each other, to our country, you know, to their families. They had a commitment to, as the Army slogan says, be the best they could be. And so they had, as you say, a lot of capacity for developing and deepening in that awareness that was already there for them.
What does that look like? It's a good example. Like, you guys, you know, training this special forces for so long too. Like, what does that kind of training look like? And did you notice a change in any of them, or because the way I kind of have a vision that people that become, let's say, enlightened, and not like capital E enlightened, but greater awareness and all that kind of stuff, and have some meditation practice, I would think would be able to discern a little bit better between truth and fiction and lies and stuff like that. So I always wonder about these corporate elites or the special forces, like if they change their attitude towards things, or even career changes, or like certain things, that if they start realizing that mindfulness is a thing and they start making more space in their brain for you know, the gaps between their thoughts, and less sort of like, you know, how it all works, like what happens to them.
Yeah, that's profound. And keep in mind, you know, we've not only worked with elite special forces troops and corporate folks and athletes with this, but we also ran clinical programs, you know, stress management and biofeedback programs and pain centers. So we saw the other end of the continuum, the price that people make when they don't have these skills. So, you're right. The special forces troops we worked with were a remarkable bunch of guys who had already achieved more than most people dreamed that they might accomplish in a lifetime. And it took.
And there's a stereotype there that might be that those guys are all sort of hoorah and don't care about that sort of thing. But to me, it just seems like it would be the opposite. They're sort of, they've already noticed that there's something there. They've already through practice or whatever, they've just incidentally noticed that there's something that makes them a little better when they get into the zone or whatever it is.
Yeah. And I remember the guys we worked with were assigned to a cold weather environment. And we were out doing some ski training, and they're in their camo gear. We're the public ski area. And some wise ass kid came up to one of the guys at one point and said, "Hey, soldier, do you like killing?" And just in a nanosecond, that soldier fired back, "Hey, kid, do you like cancer?" You know, it was just really a sweet moment of bringing that kid, back in the line. So let's just back up a little bit and just kind of create some framework here.
Yeah.
Because it's vast, and needless to say, we wrote this amazing book about spending 6 months on base with 25 special forces troops, pulling no other duty training, and all of these practices of mindfulness and biofeedback and neurofeedback. And we worked with their kids and their families, and they came out shining. But for perspective, the practice of mindfulness allows us to open our minds and open our hearts and open our wills to a deeper kind of courage that has the capacity to stand strong in the midst of whatever's going down and see it clearly for what it is. And then to take that clear seeing, whether of what's going on inside and what's going on outside, then into action, into effective, responsive action. The alternative to that is an inverse curve where if we get overwhelmed, our trauma triggers get flipped, or it's just too much intensity or complexity, then we start to pull away from reality, and we go into denial and into delusion and into absencing, disconnection, where we lose touch with our senses, and we're like living in our personal delusions. And as we do that, we start to other beings, and we start to abuse them, and we start to destroy and kill them. And we see this going on, this tremendous movement away from truth, away from contact with reality, into these delusional states of mind that then act out in ways that cause great harm for ourselves, for each other, and for our environment. So the stakes on this are super, super high. So we had a chance, I was at the medical center one day. The phone rings, and my receptionist gets me. I pick it up, and it's one of my old graduate students, Bud Cook, a remarkable martial artist and peak performance trainer. He was one of my psych grad students in the Studies in Consciousness program. And he says, "Hey, Wiz, how'd you like to design the Ultimate Warrior Training Program for U.S. Army Special Forces?" I said, "Bud, what are you saying?" He said, "No, this is for real. I just came back from a meeting with the Delta Task Force, which at the time was the most innovative military industrial complex task force think tank on the planet. They were pushing the edge on everything creative in terms of human potential to develop the vision for what the U.S. Army would be in the year 2000. And Bud was there doing a martial arts demonstration. He was approached by some of the senior staff saying, senior leaders, military leaders saying, research is coming out that's showing that we're losing 2 to 4 to maybe 20 times as many people to suicide when they come back from deployment than die in combat. And they really felt a lot of grief and a lot of shame about that. And they were looking for a way to change the military training paradigm. So they asked Bud, they said, "We don't know what to do.
And we don't know what's missing. and they really cared a lot, as you're speaking. They weren't just hoorah, macho kind of facade. They were human beings who cared about their men. They cared about the well-being of the people that they were training, and they just didn't have a clue. They knew something was missing, but asked Bud for if he had some ideas or could make us some proposals.
So Bud said, yeah, I know a couple of people back in Seattle. Let me go talk to them. So he calls us, and keep in mind, we were Vietnam protesters. I wrote my conscientious objector thesis in high school. This was not our field of operations.
Did you have any sort of gut reaction to deny it, or?
Absolutely, a recoil, but then there was also a pause to get real with it and go, damn, this might be a really incredible opportunity. And interestingly, Trident submarine was coming into Puget Sound the same week. The first Trident, each Trident submarine having thousands and thousands of times more firepower than the bombs that went off in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And we stopped to think about it. The evening I came home and told Michelle about this call from Bud, and we sat and talked about it. We came to this kind of uncomfortable realization that if we had a chance to spend 6 months training the crew of a Trident submarine, that the world would be a safer place. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, there would have been a nuclear war if one of the sub commanders did not disobey orders to fire and refused to do it. So that was one person.
Is that a Russian?
What's that?
Is that the Russian dude?
Yes.
Yeah, the Russian guy.
Yeah.
And he spent the rest of his life in pretty miserable conditions for having denied that, but he saved the world essentially. So we realized, wow, if we could train a Trident crew, that kind of got us into the game.
Yeah, just to have more presence and to really consider when to push the trigger, when not to push the trigger, not just to be on autopilot reactivity. And that's one thing that does distinguish the special forces guys that we worked with from regular soldiers, is they have more leeway. I don't know, more their chain of command is longer, and they're expected to not just blindly go ahead, but to really be able to make wise decisions. So, and they're given that much more
Autonomy, maybe?
autonomy.
Yeah, more degrees of freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
And interestingly, one of our meditation teachers, a really beloved teacher named Kalu Rinpoche, had just left Seattle the day before, and we'd spent some weeks with him before that. Remarkable man, kind of your archetypal Tibetan mountain yogi. Had spent 12, 15 years in solitary retreat. Really a wise guy, and a close ally of ours. So we called he was in Portland. We called and we got his translator on the line. And we said, Chicky, could you go ask Rinpoche about this program? If we had a chance to work with 25 guys who might start or stop the next world war and do whatever we can to expand their capacity for self-awareness and self-regulation, self-mastery, ethical discernment, would this be a good thing, or would this be really bad karma? And he went and talked with him, came back about 10 minutes later.
He said, Rinpoche thinks this is a wonderful idea.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, we got green light go ahead from all of our teachers, every single one of our mentors. We had, while the Army was processing all the red tape to get the program through, all the bureaucracy, we took advantage of that waiting time to meet with the people that we really respected. And every single one of them were like, please, thank you for doing that, and we rely upon you for the success of this program. It was absolutely, we got everybody's blessing.
And the main point that kept coming back again and again from these very wise elders who were our mentors was, if you have the opportunity to work with people who have tremendous amount of power and impact in the world, who lack the wisdom the ethical discernment and the compassion to use that power for the greater good. And if there's anything you can do to kind of nudge them towards greater insight, discernment, choicefulness, agency, rather than reactivity, and the bloodshed that might come from that, take it on. And it was a pretty remarkable opportunity.
So with some degree of trepidation, we accepted it. And the Army came back, with this go ahead and really gave us a lot of leeway on how to design the program. And we figured we might as well just ask for the best. We'll put together what we think would be the most value, deliver the greatest value, the most holistic program we could design, and see if they go for it. And they did.
Yeah, and the response from the Army when we sent in the initial proposal was, this is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology we've ever seen. And Michael Murphy and George Leonard, who started Esalen Institute, said this is the most comprehensive and intensive leadership development program ever offered in modern times. And I think that still probably stands. I've never heard of a program that had the kind of depth and intensity and total saturation that we had.
And the length of immersion that we were given, 6 whole months.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's awesome. So when was that, in the early 2000s then, or when?
No, that was late 80s.
Wow.
85, 86.
Pioneering.
That was before it even became huge. I was thinking this was after mindfulness sort of became
No,
It
those
was,
are-
in the
no, it was really
2000s or
Yeah, but-
pioneering, and it was in the old Cold War scenario.
wow.
Although many of our guys were in Europe when the Berlin Wall went down, and we think that they might have had something to do with that.
Darren,
Did it change your outlook on the military and soldiers and anything like that? I mean, you're an anti-Vietnam guy. You're probably, I sort of picture you as sort of being Vietnamese opposed to all things sort of military. And I'm wondering if I'm correct about that, and how the experience changed that, or if it did.
beautiful
Yeah,
question.
good question. Yes, both we and the men had our stereotypes about each other when we started, but some of the best, but they felt our authenticity. We made a strict promise to each other when we go in. We're going to be completely real and completely ourselves, and we're not going to, make believe that we had military background or anything like that. We were just going to be who we are, and they sensed that. And we had these testing moments. Like I was in the lab getting ready to run one of the captains through neurofeedback session, brainwave training for developing alpha, which is a relaxed and calm, but very present state of mindfulness. And I was kind of getting his scalp ready. It's kind of relaxing. He was leaning back, and he looked up at me, and he said, "So Michelle, were you?" And this is really early in the program. "Were you one of those anti-war demonstrators back in the Vietnam days?" And I took a gulp. Okay, first test moment. And I went, "You bet. I was out on the street. I was very active." And just being truthful with him. And I could visibly see him relax. It's just the power of the truth, and of honesty, and like the trust opening. I said, and then he responded. It really surprised me. He said, "Yeah, that's one of the most fascinating periods of history." to me. And I was like, history, I was like, that was my time of awakening to a lot of the realities in our country and in the world, and inwardly and outwardly. And it was like a period of history for him. So we kind of laughed about that. And there were other moments. And there was one moment where after a session, one of the young guys was hanging around. We had a little kind of book area, equipment that they could check out at the lab. And he was like, he seemed a little like kind of nervous or anxious. And we're like, "John, yes, John, did you have a question?" Because everybody had left already, and he's still there. And we're like, "You have something that you want to talk about?" And he said, "Yeah." And it was so sweet. Like it was like a a young high school boy or something asking someone out on a first date, that kind of like shyness. And he said, what do you guys think of us? You know?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. And that Jill took that one first, and I would similarly
Yeah, I took a deep
answered.
breath and I said, honestly, John, I'm really surprised how much I like you guys. And again, a few layers armor fell off of him, and he
laughed.
he laughed and said, "Yeah, we're really surprised how much we like you too." And so I'd be like on the Aikido mat with them, training in martial arts every day and making the blend, and then in the mornings, and then the afternoons they'd be in the lab with us. Learning how to really listen deeply into their bodies and control the tension in their muscles and
blood pressure
and the blood pressure and the blood flow to their hands so that they can keep their hands warm and in cold environments, and to train their brain waves, for really optimal kind of suppleness of the quality of presence and attention. At one point at the end of the program, we had a guy come in from National Science Foundation, and he was visiting the lab, and he looked around and he went, damn, this must have cost a lot. I was like, how do you justify the cost of this program? I said, well, if your job was to be deployed into hostile enemy territory, drop thousands of miles behind enemy lines, to dig in deep, get out as much surveillance as you could, find the rebel rousers and the allies that were there, and not just totally destroy yourself through your own fear and angst and stress and bewilderment at that kind of situation. Wouldn't you want to have really deep confidence that you could manage yourself, manage your mind, manage your body, to stay alive and maybe have some chance of getting out of there? And I said, we've got all this
and he
tech.
said, yeah.
We have all this tech, I said, basically to teach them one thing, and that's confidence. To teach them confidence, that choice follows awareness. And as their awareness deepens, they have more choice and they can make wiser decisions for how they'd manage their own inner resources and how they'd respond to whatever was coming their way on the outside. So it was a memorable moment.
It's got to really stop panicking too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we had one of the guys came to visit us, years later. It was after a desert storm. And he was one of those guys who had been, dug in for weeks before the initial assault, doing surveillance. And he came to visit us and talked about, how scary it was being out there, knowing that they were trying to, track his communications and find him and his team. And they were actually told that initially that when that war started, it would go nuclear and they should dig in as deep as they could. And he said, I was so grateful that I had some practices that I could do to just not panic and lose it, and maintain some presence and be able to get out of there when the time came. So
was there any more esoteric teachings at all? Like, were you guys using any hemisync stuff from the Monroe Institute or any kind of tools like that? I'm assuming, because I think in the 80s and 90s that was kind of getting popular, and the government had their own programs, their Stargate or whatever. But did you guys ever talk about out-of-body experiences, or was there any kind of more extreme spiritual training like that?
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff. Bob Monroe was kind of an elder in my tribe. I was part of a research group out of Menninger Foundation at the Council Grove conferences, and would spend a week every year with all these researchers, including Bob. So I knew Bob and his work really well. We didn't use hemisync or any kind of driving technology, that would entrain the nervous system. We wanted these guys to grow their own. We wanted these guys to, through the biofeedback and through the meditation training and then testing these skills on the mat in martial arts and then out in the field, we wanted them to really know how to flip the switches themselves rather than have to rely on the batteries and the device. So, but in terms of things popping, you know, in kind of more esoteric or profound kinds of ways,
As they got deeper into
as
the
they,
practice.
yeah, like part of the training, you know, we did all the lab work and the martial arts and the field training, but we also took them on a month-long silent meditation retreat called the Encampment. And for many
There's
of
a whole chapter about it.
there's 3 chapters on the
That's
Encampment
true.
in the book.
We spread it out. So going through the very details of the training. It really
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Yeah. So initially it was about developing, you know, initially in preparation, many of the guys came to us and said, look, I know how to do all this macho soldier stuff and jump halo out of an airplane and open my shoot above the treetops. And, you know, that's scary shit, but I know how to do it. But you're telling me I'm going to have to sit with my own mind in silence for 30 days. I'm going to go bonkers on you, you know. It's like, so a lot of the guys were really terrified of the prospect.
Is that straight up no talking for 30 days? It's like nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there was
breaks?
you know,
No social talking. They could ask us questions, and you know, if they needed stuff, they could talk kind of functional kind of talking, but not regular.
no conversation
Just
basically,
really
other
being with
than
themselves. Yeah.
dialogue when we were in the hall doing the practices. So initially it was just about settling down and beginning. It's sort of like, you know, meditation retreats, kind of like turning a 10-watt light bulb into a 10-watt laser beam. Yeah. You want to develop a quality of stability and continuity of awareness and build the coherence of the mind. So whatever you put your attention on, be it the breath or listening or scanning through the body, the beam of awareness is steady and strong and deep and clear, and you're not going off to thoughts of the past and thoughts of the future or falling asleep.
Not getting distracted in our usual ways.
So the first phase of the retreat was really about building the concentration and the wholeheartedness of presence that was necessary then to look deeply into the nature of things, look deeply into thoughts and feelings and sensations and perceptions, especially the sticky, gooey ones that tend to orbit around and carry us away and get us entangled, and how to recognize those neurotic tendencies and disentangle themselves from them. Like you said, Graham, you know, to realize that there are thoughts and there's awareness of thoughts, and that
They're
the
not their
thoughts don't define us. You know, despair is with me, depression's with me, fear is with me. But it's like Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen teacher, saying we have to learn to smile to our sorrow because we're more than our sorrow. That smile gives you that edge to see clearly, but not be dominated by your own mind. So initially it was about concentration, and then it was about looking and listening deeper into how the mind and body works and where the knots were and what tightens them and what loosens them.
I was going to ask you that if single pointed focus came before mindfulness or the other way around.
Yeah, the concentration.
Yeah.
Concentration is the foundation for the mindfulness, and the foundation for that is basically just right relations. You know, it's just you're not going to go raiding somebody else's stash during the retreat and being worried if they're going to come punch you for that. You know, the silence, they didn't have to worry about getting caught in you know, telling stories that weren't true. So the moral and ethical foundation, which was kind of imposed in the retreat, then building the concentration, then developing the mindfulness to look deeply into the nature of things, and then really subtle practices of moving the awareness through the body and trying to see, you know, like the meditation was within a field of here you sit, but where do you draw your strength from? Is it all from within, or is there someone who's really a source of inspiration for you? Imagine you could reach out and hold Graham's hand because he's a mentor for you, and you can draw some of his strength and his wisdom and his love and radiate your gratitude back to them. Imagine Graham reaching out to his mentors, who reach out to their mentors, who reach out to their mentors, so that you're not sitting here by yourself, your sorry ass little isolated self, but you're connected to streams of energy and inspiration and strength that back you up, and that you can radiate and extend your love and your thanks back up through those lineages and to those ancestors. So, it was particle and wave. It was really helping them realize that no matter, they had 100 pounds of stuff in their pack, but they had access to vast, vast reservoirs of strength and wisdom and healing energy and inspiration and guidance that they could draw upon, and teaching them how to tap into that to then give them greater stability and strength in their meditation.
Wow. Was there any tracking about this group that you trained later on over the decades and stuff? Is there any kind of follow-up study or longitudinal study on them?
That was challenging because we did a lot of pre and post tests, and we have a lot of data from the benefits from the program, which were amazing on every level. But after the program, because it was still classified and secret at that time, and because of them needing to not be traceable and trackable, we couldn't follow where they were. It was only if they would write to us, or approach us with questions. So we had some, but not in a formal way. A lot of them disappeared into, black ops and different programs, that we don't know where they were at the time. But we have had, and we've had some great connections with the guys after they, were out of the program too, and they were more free to speak about the benefits. And we got letters from their families, which were amazing, probably the best data that we collected, with gratitude, thank you, I've got a dad again. He doesn't just come home and knock me around the house. We talk.
Oh, wow.
He listens. And similarly from the spouses, so that really, we would say, okay, the program's a success, despite all the other, research data, after action report statistics that we had. But that was where it really hit home.
And I think a few, more tangible data points. One team was selected as the most outstanding team in the NATO games.
So we knew things like that.
When the program was over, Colonel Kenneth Getty, who was just an amazing elder who really brought the program into being. When he left, he went to the Army War College and carried a lot of this wisdom with him into that. And then he was in charge of special operations in Europe, overseeing a lot of behind the scenes action that was going on with a number of the men that we trained that were deployed into Berlin at that point, doing undercover operations. And that was all during the time that led up to the Berlin Wall coming down. So who knows, maybe in some small little rippling way, we had some influence there on the people that were at play.
When Colonel Getty was getting ready to retire, and we were talking with him, I asked him, Colonel Getty, Ken, it's his first name, Ken, what are you most proud of from all your years of service? What do you, when you look back on, what do you feel really best about? He said, what I feel the best about is all the covert humanitarian projects that we were able to do that helped thousands of people that no one knows anything about. All those ways that we were able to help. And that was the kind of heart that he had. And so also for a lot of the men. So back to Darren's initial question, it completely shattered a lot of our stereotypes going in, and just meeting each other as human beings, human to human, shipwrecked on the on planet Earth right now. How do we want to be together? And what's the world we want to create together?
Yeah.
Well, what were some of the main things you guys learned from them? I mean, we kind of touched on some of it, but what were sort of the things that stuck with you for 50 years or whatever it's been? I guess 40.
Well, not quite that many, but
yeah, that's a really great question, Darren. I don't think anybody's ever asked us that straight up. So I'll just divert a little bit and come back to it. I remember I was in Kansas City Airport once with Geshe Sopo, who was a really revered Tibetan teacher, professor from University of Wisconsin, and he had fled Tibet during the Chinese invasion. You know, that was basically what's happening in Gaza now that happened in Tibet 70 years ago. And he was lamenting that the Tibetans did not have a strong enough army to defend. They weren't better prepared. They didn't have the capacity to defend themselves and to preserve a wisdom culture that held such priceless treasures in the world. And that really, really touched me. And I think, you know, the genesis of this program, what it came out of was this work from Jim Channon, who was a really beloved friend and colleague who opened the door to this program. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Channon, who had studied the human potential movement for about 6 years and developed Task Force Delta and this meme of evolutionary tactics, a manual for the 1st Earth Battalion, that really envisioned our military as having the potential to be a planet stewarding force and a people protecting force that would go in when there's natural disasters or there's conflicts breaking out and establish peace and harmony and feed people and just be a force for good in the world. And that's the vision that gave rise to this. And we could see, Darren, you know, being on base with these guys, there were times where, you know, something would come up in the way of, you know, considering a humanitarian crisis and what might be done to resolve that or help with that. And you could just see how quick these guys' men's would snap into it together. Their collective wisdom and intelligence would come up. They knew how to access the resources that they'd need to help and to restore what needed restoring and repair what needed repairing and protect what needed protecting. And we need people on this planet that are able to and willing to risk their lives to step into harm's way on behalf of really caring for and protecting people rather than just advancing a colonialist elite agenda. So one way or another, these skills are necessary, you know, for any of us to take a risk and step out of our comfort zone. We're activating a little bit of the warrior spirit within ourselves. These guys were taking it to the max. So there's a real deep sense of appreciating the nobility of their humanity in that. And one of the guest teachers that we brought in was Brother David Stendelrast, who's a Benedictine monk and an incredible being.
I was going to say a spiritual warrior.
Yeah, a spiritual warrior. And his opening words when he spent 3 days on base with us was, well, when I was in the Nazi army, and he goes on to describe as a young...
Everybody's mouth drops. He's a little humble, gentle... Zen monk.
Yeah, I think he's about 5'4", you know, really tiny guy, but bright spirit. And he goes on to describe the similarities between being a monastic and being in the military.
He was in Austria. He was Austrian.
Yeah,
when Hitler invaded.
He was impressed into the Nazi army.
Right, wasn't that he signed up for.
Yeah. But, you know, he just got their attention. And within probably 10, 15 minutes, most of these guys' eyes were moist, if not dripping, because what he was really affirming was their kind of the divine dignity of their willingness to lay down their lives for something larger than themselves. And he really, really ennobled these men. And at the end of the program, after we had all of these really extraordinary guest faculty that came in, pretty tough dudes and martial artists and military icons, we asked the guys, if you had to go out on a dangerous mission and choose one of the many guest lecturers that we had, and who'd really have your back and you could depend on them, who would you choose? And about 95% of the guys chose Brother David.
It's a fascinating point that you make about the Tibet and the not, like, I've been reading this book on Christianity and nonviolence and stuff, and it seems like a great sort of ideology, but it's I don't even know how to express it, but I love the thought of like the First Earth Battalion, where somebody can, be there to do all these other missions too, but also be warriors if the need comes, and they're obviously trained and trusted to have that discernment, and you're not worried about it being a corrupt, elite sort of institution that's gonna, cause more damage, because that's the problem with the violence, right? It just never ends, right? It's
yeah. And part of it is, Graham, it's like part of our charter was to teach these men to recognize and befriend their inner enemies and to stop the war inside.
Right.
And as long as people are coming from a place of rage and separateness and dysregulation, they've like so constricted their access to their full nervous system's power and to their true spirit. It's just, we're not going to get there through anger and violence and revenge and reactivity. We'll just create more generations of trauma that goes back and forth, amongst groups of people. So to have people that know how to make peace within themselves so that they know which actions are going to make sense out there, and people who have come to a deep enough intimacy with themselves as they look out through their eyes, and somebody pointing a gun at them, they can see, wow, just like me, that brother wants to go home alive to his family.
Have that compassion that's really deep, that they're not just reacting in some emotional anger or whatever, they're regulating it. That's fascinating. Darren, do you have any questions? Or
I was just going to add a thing for Darren.
Go ahead.
Last question, in addition to what Joel said. As I look at the world today and the dangerous situation we're in on many levels right now, it seems that building our communities, having strong communities and strong relations is so vitally important to kind of intentionally develop and build powerful relations in where we live and who we're with. And these guys really had that with each other, and they really, really cared for each other and had each other's backs, and they were tight in a way that was, essential for their survival. And part of our role was to help them even to strengthen that connectedness even more from the inside out. But they had a true sense of community with each other, and it was very inspiring. It still is.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
And really, I think the power in this book, the bones of it are the story of our work with the Special Forces, the Jedi Warrior Training Program for the U.S. Army's
They called
Green
it
Berets.
the Jedi Warrior Program.
But what really got us to write this was after years of just saying, no, we don't want to reduce it to 10 cool tips for how to be a successful dude.
How you too can be a Green
it's
Beret,
just that just made us nauseous. But when COVID dropped, and we just saw how dysregulated people were, and the vulnerability that was up, and the isolation, and just the primacy of these kinds of skills, spiritual skills, self-regulation and flow state skills, building community skills, getting real skills are, we realize, this is really a book about courage. This is about the kind of courage that it takes to show up
keep our heart and our eyes and our mind wide open to what's actually happening,
and not turn away, not to default into absencing and pulling away, and through the courage to show up and to see clearly with our eyes and minds and hearts wide open, then to be able to come into some kind of empathic attunement with what's going on within us and in the world around us, where we're not disconnected from that, but we're really intimately and attuned with that, so that we have more likelihood that we're going to be able to wisely and compassionately respond and get the best outcomes that we can. And then that success will build our confidence and fuel our courage to keep showing up ever more deeply and developing the capacity for that kind of special kind of courage. So I think we all need this right now. You know, if I could kind of flip a switch and deploy this kind of training to a population right now, I give priority to young people.
Yeah, I was going to ask about how young people are responding to mindfulness compared to the other generations, like let's say Gen X or millennials, now Gen Z. There, have you experienced training them at all, and are they any different?
Yeah, in fact, we're working with a group of high school folks tomorrow that we're really excited about. The word mindfulness, unfortunately, has become a bit overused and abused, and it's kind of a buzzword, but what it actually is, that quality of presence, that quality of awareness and caring, you know, that's something that everybody that we work with values for their lives.
Is it harder for them though, being distracted with devices, having like sort of, it seems like they have less of an attention span?
Yeah, I'd say the impacts of the digital addictions are pretty strong, and
we didn't have to deal with that before.
That takes some overcoming. But I'd say, you know, just there's enough young folks right now whose eyes are open to just go, wow, I am stepping into one amazing but scary world, and maybe I need to learn some skills to warrior up to meet it full on. So I think, you know, just approaching this through resilience and developing life skills, this kind of curriculum, really well grounded in science and health, let alone better academic and sports performance. So it's not, you know, we've never had a hard time making the business case for this kind of training, you know. It's just, you know, it's like how can we afford not to do this? How can we afford to send soldiers out into battle or into, you know, people into all of these difficult situations without giving them a strong foundation of these kinds of skills? It's just like, you know, the costs are incidental compared to the price that we pay for not providing this kind of training.
Yeah, because now there are programs, but they're way shorter, you know, 8-week course or something like that for veterans coming back. But we worked with guys who pre-deployment, it was to prepare them so that we'd have less casualties in that regard. And I think that's really vital. And that's part of our interest in working with the youth, having young Jedi programs.
It's also kind of like, I mean, it's sort of right at the height of the Cold War, or the trailing off of the Cold War, where there's like, I think that there was like, I mean, maybe you have a different take on it, but there was like some real evil in the room, you know, some real recognizable evil that was like, you know, during that shit, there was a clear side of the Berlin Wall that people wanted to be on. No one was like trying to break into East Germany, you know, it seemed to be all the other way around. And then as we go through COVID and all this other stuff, it seems like maybe tyranny and evil isn't as far away as we thought it was. So it's kind of like we were talking to someone else a while ago about how the spiritual side of us sort of exists at the pleasure of the materialists, at least for the last couple 100 years. And Tibet kind of highlights that, right? Where if they would have had some materialism going on, you know, however that looks like, but you know, at least some tanks and shit like that, they would have been able to protect their lifestyle. And in some ways, that's what these I mean, people are going to hate this, but in some ways, that's what this U.S. military, despite all its flaws, has been doing for the last, you know, 50 or 100 years, is because despite all the highlight reels of the things they get wrong, I mean, there's still, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm in Canada, so we're sort of adjacent. We're like the little cousin. Yeah. But there's not another fucking continent that I'm picking to go live on. You know what I mean? There's just not.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's just The human race in total is still, I think, really in its adolescence. We're playing it out, I think, big time right now, especially in America.
Yeah.
But there's a quality of there's a capacity for maturing and ripening ourselves, really realizing the treasures that are bundled in our being human, in our minds and our bodies, and the kind of mysterious depths of spirit that connect us to all things and all beings, and that we really can open those portals of potential. We're not going to get it from microdosing. We're not going to get it from reading a book or attending a weekend.
Except our book.
Weekend seminar or what have you. It takes discipline, and to maintain the discipline means having a community of people that can really support and encourage you, and having mentors that are really reliable and trustworthy, that can guide you along the way and know what they're doing. But there's also a lot of stuff online and in books and in podcasts to get us going, and to find communities even online with people who we've never met. So I think there's a huge need, and there's a lot of resources available. If anybody wants to follow up with us, simplest way is just go to our website, wisdomatwork.com, wisdomatwork.com, and just click on connect and send us a note. We'll follow up with you.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny, Darren. That's what Arthur Versluis was saying too. He's a esoteric teacher, and it's funny how they both come from different angles, but the same conclusion is like decentralized communities and building communities, stuff like that. What do you see in the future before we let you go, with mindfulness and meditation and in the next 10 or 15 years maybe? And also, have you noticed any kind of because we've seen an increase in Christianity and like Christ kind of consciousness, non-denominational, but and it seems positive, but what also seems to be happening is a bit of demonization of the new age, like a bit of a pushback against the new age movements. Have you guys noticed that at all? And where do you think we're going to be in 10 or 15 years with the new age and the mindfulness?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to be all over the map. You're going to have the polarized margins, that demonize each other from both sides of the fence. The Christian tradition has roots and practices of practicing the presence of God. Okay. That's mindfulness, I don't have it handy, but there's a beautiful quote from Thich Nhat Hanh where he just describes, that this quality of presence for your listeners or your viewers right now. See if you can just sort of nest back into that part of you that's looking out through your eyes and knows you're looking out through your eyes.
Yep.
That's mindful.
Yeah.
That's mindfulness. That's Godfulness. That's kindfulness. That's Holy Spiritness. It's just that spark of divine presence and intelligence within us all. And if you've got people who colonize a religion, whatever one it might be, and just try and brand it, uniquely to themselves, and lack the tolerance to appreciate that you can't really brand spirit because it's in every one of us. It's just
like that.
It leads to problems. But we've worked with countless people in the Christian community who practice mindfulness in a way that's really true to their spirit with no compromise.
Yeah.
And in the Muslim community and in the First Nations community, and we're talking about universal human capability. Okay.
Yeah.
Like we're all embodied. We all have the capacity to touch a quality of presence that regards whatever's arising and passing within that field of awareness. That's just, our God-given nature. And if we feel an affiliation towards one tradition or another, God bless us for that. May we find teachers and leaders that have super high integrity and really live by those holy teachings. And may we bow to each other on the street and just honor, just like me, there's another godling, you know, it's like different package, whatever. Yeah.
I think if we're going to make it as a species, if we are going to survive into that future that you're thinking about, we're going to absolutely need to develop greater mindfulness by whatever name we call it.
Yeah.
When we were designing the programs and consulting with our advisors and mentors, we were speaking with one woman. She's was a nun, a Burmese nun, since she was like 4 or 5, and she was now teaching religious studies at California Institute of Integral Studies at that time, head of the religion department there. And we talked about, so do you have any suggestions for how to design, especially the meditation component of the program? And she said, by all means, don't call it meditation. She said, call it mental toughness.
That's great. I was going to ask you what the new term for mindfulness is going to be, because like you said, it was cool like 20 years ago. Now it's kind of becoming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mind fitness is good.
Mind
fitness.
Mind
We use
fitness
that
is
a lot.
golden, you know, and
But yeah, it's whatever is going to be more of an opener. It doesn't matter so much what we call it. It's that people get the experience and they know what that's like. So rather than using some words that might turn people off, like it's too Eastern or too whatever, too New Age, you know, you call it what is going to be close, you know, and relevant, but something that's palatable and attractive. So she was very wise with that.
one other point in response to that question about the future is I think the frontiers really will require us to open the field of our collective wisdom and intelligence.
Yeah.
You know, none of us is smart enough to figure it all out together.
By ourselves.
And by ourselves. It's kind of like a telescope array where different telescopes are gathering photons. We need to learn how to do this together. And that means learning how to drop into deep states in a prayerful way, you know, holding deep questions that we're sourcing inspiration and guidance for, that then we can bring into the world. So I think that to me is one of the most necessary and exciting frontiers for our future.
Yeah. And love. I mean, love has been the answer, and a lot of our podcast ends up in love, as love being the answer. I think we all have to have more love in our hearts for everybody. And
Joel and Michelle, this has been great. You mentioned the one website. Can you just give us the book title again, where people can get it? And
yes, the website's wisdomatwork.com. Here's the book, Manual for the Awakening Warrior, the Special Forces Secret Mind, Body, Spirit Training Program.
And it's so great to be with you today, because this is the actual first day that the books are coming into the bookstores. You know, it's being the formal release date. So we really appreciate your invitation to explore together.
We appreciate you guys. Yeah, we appreciate you guys coming on the show. It was a great chat, and we hope the book does well. We encourage our listeners to pick it up. Joel and Michelle, this has been fantastic. Thank you, and come back anytime.
All right. Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Graham.
Yes.
Inspiration to be with you.
Yeah, you too.
And that was our chat with Joel and Michelle Levey. Manual for the Awakening Warrior. What'd you think?
Yeah, it was great.
That was a good one. See, you have the sun coming in too. You need that little.
I have to put curtains up. I'm just still not used to the afternoon sun being where it is right now. So sorry about that.
Well, you should get did you notice at the beginning, Joel had the little prism or something that was.
Oh yeah, I like that.
You should get like some rainbow on you instead. Be all right. So big thanks to Joel and Michelle for coming to the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you choose to support us and keep the show going over at gramerica.ca/support. Head over there today, sign up for monthly or make a one-time donation. And as long as enough of you keep doing that, we'll keep making podcasts. And it's a good little agreement we have going on together. So we call it value for value. If you're getting some value from the show, send some value back our way. Of course, check out, share the show. That's also a great way to help us, as we don't get a lot of traction from the algos these days. Head over to adultbrain.ca for all our audiobooks, contact@thecabin.com for trips and events, and gramericaoutlawed.ca for the podcast, where we do some roundups and stuff like that. Is kind of fun. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening. And we will see you next week.